This is a presentation showing how to change the rug in the bedroom of a 2000 Safari Continental to hardwood. Now it's probably no different than most other motorhomes, but these are the steps that I did. These pictures show what the rug looked like before and then after the work was completed. On the motorhome I have, at least, the rug had been cleaned many times, and there was a lot of soap and so forth embedded into the rug. I spent a great deal of time trying to clean it to improve it. It was better, but finally it just seemed, well, not as acceptable as what I wanted, so therefore I thought I'd change it over. Now what I did do, which took probably a great deal of work compared to other ways to do this, was to put a border around the walls and the bed out of a different colored wood. In the reading that I've done on this type of work, normally what is done is to face nail the boards, fill them with putty, then sand the entire surface, and then varnish and so forth, polish it, etc. That did not appeal to me particularly, given the difficulty it'd be to varnish and to sand something in this kind of an unusual shape. Plus, I don't like the idea of face nailing these boards. They're quite beautiful in themselves, and I didn't want marks on the boards. So I put this together more like a Chinese puzzle with different keyways and so forth, and that's what I'll show you in this presentation. So to start, here is the rug with the underlay exposed. It was simple enough to pull it off. I was somewhat concerned. I thought maybe they had screwed it down in places or glued it or whatever, but it's put down just like a standard rug with these tack strips along the edges, and it pulled up quite easy. Then the next thing to do, of course, is to pull up all of the underlay, which was, that in itself was not that difficult, and then pry off the tack strips that held down the rug. One of the things, though, that have to be accounted for, sometimes there's nails and staples and all that sort of stuff left on the floor. That has to be gone over very carefully, and all of the staples removed, because it'll produce an uneven surface, of course, for the wood. Now, what you can see in here as you go through this is you'll see that there's stains along the floor. This motorhome had a lot of serious leaks in it and damage due to water, all of which now have been repaired. But the last one you can see on the wall here, I'll show you a mechanism and a methodology later on, another presentation, how to clean this perfectly, because the entire motorhome was cleaned. Then this one leak appeared again and stained the wall, which it does because it pulls the resins out of the wood underneath that cloth fabric. But there is just an amazing way to fix this. So anyway, when you look along the floor, that's what you see is the dark marks along the edges of the walls is where the water is getting in. It probably happened for years. In the front of the entranceway of this bedroom, at the front of the bedroom, the floor was bulged a little bit, so it was uneven. I was kind of concerned about this, that it was rotten. It wasn't rotten, but I think that it had expanded because of the water damage. However, I proceeded on with that as it was, because I was not going to take up sections of the floor at this point. Now, what you can see along the walls here is when the kick panels are removed, or whatever you want to call those things that cover up the cabling, the cables run along the wall for the 120 volt power, and also some cables that come up from the inverter on the driver's side. And these panels, or these foot cover things, they're about like 6.5 inches wide each, were replaced with just the rug, and you'll see that in the next portion. So the first step, according to the instructions with laying down wood, is to make sure there's a vapor barrier there to protect the wood from bowing and cupping and so forth. On this motorhome, as I found out later, it probably wasn't necessary, because underneath the OSB board here is an injected foam, and then under that, I believe, is a vapor barrier. Not all motorhomes would have this, but I put the vapor barrier down anyway. It wasn't that much work to do it. It's just 6 mil, poly, and you staple it with a staple gun. So what is being shown here is the edging that goes around the TV cabinet. So it was cut. The nice thing about this is those angles actually are 45-degree angles, so they're very easy to cut on a miter saw and get a perfect fit. But what you can't do, because of the way flooring works, is necessarily lock the additional panels or wood flooring slats together because they're tongue and groove. And what you'll see in this, and that makes it a little bit more difficult, is you have to create your own tongues and grooves at various places because you can't get close enough to the wall to nail this stuff down unless you face nail it, and I didn't want to do that. So what you're seeing here, but these two pieces, is I designed it so that the border on the TV cabinet was the groove, the tongue. No, it was a groove, and I had to put a tongue to join those two pieces together, and that's what you see here. And then I stained the edge so it wouldn't, where the cut was, wouldn't show up so much. Now, along the edge of the wall, what I also did was I flipped it over and undercut the groove so that just the top part of the groove was there, the bottom was open. And the reason for that was that I wanted to insert this rug that I would take off that kick panel and insert that underneath that edge, just so it had some mechanism for holding it. Now, what you can see at the rear part of the bedroom on the driver's side here, if you look carefully at the dark piece of wood, you can see one of the keyways that I made, which is a slat that slides into the groove. And that's because there's a point at which I had to flip the wood from being a tongue and groove to a groove and tongue. I did the same thing on the passenger side, and you can see if you look carefully at the back part of the motorhome, the rear of the motorhome, you can see a tongue that's been inserted into the groove, and that's so that it'll match with the grooves on the slats. I did the same thing on both sides of the motorhome. You'll also notice that on one side of the motorhome there's a narrow slat. Actually, it's both sides once you look at it when it's all together. But the slats, obviously, boards do not measure out exactly to the width of the motorhome, so some had to be cut. And this worked out well because on the wall side I had the tongue outwards for one board, and then coming from the bed side the tongue was out. So therefore they're going towards each other. This narrow piece of wood had two grooves. I used a router to cut a groove in it. That would drop into this narrower part, and then you could pull the dark wood into that, and it matched up with the slat with the tongue coming from the other side.